Jacques Attali, Prophet of Global Freedom. Jacques Attali, author of dozens of books, political figure in the respect that he has served as advisor to statesmen, most notably François Mitterrand, the Prime Minister of France. He is a well-known and celebrated economist and apologist of global policies, globalist economy, a globalist regime, ultimately. But he is a defender of freedom. He is not what he is often taken to be by anti-globalists who assume that he is a lover of dictators and dictatorships. Indeed, he is a prophet of horrible things, of doom even, but he does not, and he acknowledges not to be a lover of what he sees coming. So, for instance, in a recent interview, and a link should be posted below this video, in a recent interview in France, he suggests that we're heading toward the suicide of humanity. But at the same time, he is telling us how to avert that suicide. Now, in 2005, Attali published a book, Karl Marx ou l'esprit du monde. This book has two epigraphs. The first one, a citation from Pascal, the second from Hegel. In the Pascal citation, we read effectively that it is not enough to try to have everyone agree on one thing. In fact, that won't work. What we need is a different type of reconciliation. We need someone to reconcile everyone. The implication is even if they don't agree with each other. In the second quote, we have Hegel speaking of an emperor who is a great political figure, obviously, but he is, in his grandiosity, he is as a l'âme, the citation is in French, the soul of the world. He says soul, but not spirit or mind, because he doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't know what he's instrumental to. So political figures are, as we could say, marionnettes. They are marionettes, guignols, very often. They're theatrical characters who are serving, well, in a play that they don't really understand. Now, Hegel, of course, assumes that he has understood the logic of the game, of the play, and the title, of course, Karl Marx, Esprit du Monde, Karl Marx, Mind or Spirit of the World, suggests that there is a Marxist overarching plan to what is happening today, even though politicians may not understand this. Now, Attali is a defender of freedom. What does this mean? Well, in decrying the contemporary, we could say more than a decline of civilization, we have he calls it a tendency to, or to drive to move, yeah, in this move in the direction of to end up in a collective suicide, essentially, a suicide de l'humanité, right? The suicide of humanity. Attali points out to the problem, and he points out to a solution as he sees it. And it turns out that his diagnosis and his prognosis, both are essentially Machiavellian. What does this mean? Well, let us consider what the problem is. Why are we heading toward collective suicide? Well, we're heading there because we're still tied to old conceptions of capitalism, and of individual freedom, as we often call it. So unless we fix things, we're going to end up with, say, climate catastrophe or thermonuclear wars occasioned by the rise of old-style dictatorships. We'll end up with perhaps some major diseases that will bring about the end of humanity, or of the human species, rather. He speaks of humanity, but this is what he means. So there are various reasons why economically we live lives that are unsustainable. We spend too much, so we are, given our habits, we are making capitalism and the current situation unsustainable. So the rich countries are no longer sustainable. All right, that is not hard to understand. So what's the alternative? The alternative is to shift toward a globalist policy of restrictions on the so-called individual freedom that will allow us to survive. Right. Is he wrong? He is not altogether wrong. However, his assessment, Attali's assessment, is based on a Machiavellian conception of the human situation and of human nature, of course. Now, in this conception, the human being is a beast. And self-fulfilled prophecy, to some extent, we have been raised as beasts in a cage. We are supposed to be bundles of feelings that, when left to themselves, behave as beasts, or worse, as devils. So we have the unleashing of passions in private, in the private life, and then we have a public life that is dominated by rules and regulations. This is what we're raised to believe and to live by in our modern or hyper-modern world, in our mechanistic universe and upbringing. So given this premise, it is inevitable that at some point the private world begins overflowing and affecting the public world. I mean, if in private I am Mr. Hyde, yes, inevitably at some point there will be repercussions when it comes to my work as Dr. Jacques. So the situation will be unsustainable in the long run. Our inner corruption will have a dire effect on our gilded facade, the pretense, the world of pretense that we have set up. Right. Low attention, low attention span, and all kinds of psychological troubles, deficits, and this will be treated perhaps by the public industry of medication and as some mechanical glitch in the system that we have to work to tame, if not to eradicate. So, given this premise that we are essentially beasts, right, lost in a universe that is essentially mechanical, functioning. One is tempted to say in virtue of mechanisms, material mechanisms. It is inevitable at this point that we move in the direction of a global regime. What is the globalist or global regime? It entails fundamentally the rise of ideologues, universal ideologues, who are there to defend our freedom, global freedom, beyond any narrow or closed mindset. But this also means, of course, beyond nation states, beyond the closed society. Hence the appeal in that epigraph to Pascal. It is not enough for people to agree. People will never agree. Nations will never agree, find an agreement, and so universal peace among each other. We won't agree. We just won't. War, even tribal warfare, is inevitable. However, what is not inevitable is the outburst of a global hot war, right? That can be contained. How? Well, precisely by having people live as marionettes where everyone is attending to relatively private interests and submitting to the dictates of a regime of rules and regulations, so technocracy ultimately, for the sake of survival. We would not be able to survive without following these rules and regulations. So, inwardly, passions. We have passions, we have an irrational beast, moved by, we could say, biological mechanisms, biochemical, even historical, whatever you want to call them, mechanisms of evolution and so forth. And outwardly, we have a cage, a system of rules and regulations that is able to reconcile differences. How so? Well, by having everyone, of course, through fear. Attali is quite well aware of the importance of fear in managing political things, and so the life of people, and having people function all together, even though they disagree among each other. It doesn't matter. In fact, disagreement is essential ultimately to the rise of a globalist order. Why? Because everybody's distracted by their differences. So identity politics, tribal warfare is fine as long as it is managed and thus contained by the cage, the regime of rules and regulations. Now, if we accept the Machiavellian anthropology that undergirds this conception of politics as ultimately globalist ideology, then there is no rational objection to the policy. It becomes inevitable. What is happening today, we might not like it, but that doesn't matter. It's inevitable. We're driven to fall into this solution to the human condition. Now, what's the alternative? The only alternative would be the closed societies. How do you recover the closed society? Well, you're going to go back to outright tribal warfare. Well, we are ignoring the fundamental alternative, which was the alternative to globalist ideologues running the world. That alternative was a poetic one, an old philosophical one, whereby not the fueling and channeling of the passions is espoused and propounded, but the moderation of the passions. And so we will have war among nations, but in the best of cases, we will have moderation in conflict, the conflict being moderated by intelligent people who are not Machiavellian, people who are aware of the importance of reverence for the people, of moderation of the passions through religion, um, people who are um, aware of the inevitability of universal self-destruction, so suicide, given a Machiavellian foundation. Why would collective suicide not be averted by the Machiavellian solution and project? Well, uh, this I have discussed in previous interventions, but um, to be very succinct about this, well, simply because there is a human nature that transcends the Machiavellian conception. And when this human nature is denied, or crippled, and repressed, inevitably it seeks a way out of whatever is given to it as a replacement of the original human nature. And so we seek destruction. We seek destruction of the very system that we feel is an imposition, to be an imposition on us, on our nature. The private distractions will ultimately be inadequate, insufficient. So, as Attali himself recognizes, the old capitalist regimes are no longer sustainable. We need a globalist one, but the globalist one ultimately will lead to a situation of serfdom, global serfdom. And technology, the escalation of technological development as a means to control and define the human being. And this goes into medication, this goes into the physical manipulation of bodies. Well, this will is just feeding into global madness, which is violence against our original nature. It just won't work. It's a postponing of suicide by way of rendering it global. Right? So you're postponing local suicide so that by stuffing all the problems under the rug, as it were, until it explodes on a global scale. So that is the only alternative. So is Jacques Attali right? Yes, he is right. We're moving in the direction of global, shall we say, suicide. However, he is wrong when it comes to the cause of that suicide. According to him, that collective suicide is given by not following the rules and regulations and therefore the demands of a globalist regime. In reality, that globalist regime and its demands is integral part and parcel of the drive toward collective suicide.